Thanks everyone for taking some time to be with us tonight to learn a little bit more about the City of Weed, the services that it provides, its budget, and some of the goals that the city has going forward to try and maintain those services. We are hosting a webinar. It's being recorded. This recording will be available after the conclusion of the meeting on the city website and so forth. We will have about a 15-20 minute presentation that'll be made by our city manager, Dr. Dustin Stambaugh, here in a moment. If you do have questions, we ask that you use the Zoom Q&A feature. You may have to click the little more button down by your controls and access the Q&A. You can type your questions in there and we will go through them at the end. So with that, Dustin, if you want to take it away, and thanks one more time, everyone, for spending some time.
Thank you, Rob. Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us. My name is Dr. Dustin Stambaugh, and I serve as your city manager for the City of Weed. As many of you know, we have been talking about budget for the last couple of months. Every year, it's the same thing. City council and city staff spend significant time reviewing revenues, expenditures, infrastructure needs, and service priorities. Tonight's conversation, though, is about much more than this year's or next year's budget. It's about the future of our community and understanding the services we provide, that infrastructure we maintain, the challenges we're facing, and the goals that we have for Weed over the next decade and beyond. The decisions that we make today will affect the roads we drive on tomorrow, as they'll reflect public safety services, infrastructure investments, and the quality of life we leave for future generations. My goal tonight here is simple. I want to explain what the city does, how those services are funded, the challenges we're facing, and to help everyone better understand the choices before us as a community. Tonight, we're going to talk through 7 topics. First, we're going to who we are and what services the city provides. Second, the infrastructure and facilities we maintain. Third, how the city budget actually works. Fourth, where the city revenues come from. Fifth, why some revenues can be used for certain purposes while other revenues cannot. Sixth, the challenges created by deferred maintenance and rising costs. And finally, some of the options that we are discussing as we plan for the future. So before we talk about budgets, it's important to understand what a city government actually does. The City of Weed is a full-service municipality serving approximately 2,700 residents. What sometimes creates confusion is that local government responsibilities are divided among several organizations. For example, the county provides certain services. The city provides certain services. Special districts such as Parks and Rec District provide certain services. And then, of course, state and federal agencies provide additional services. Tonight, we're focusing on the services and infrastructure that are the responsibility for the City of Weed. So one important thing that our residents should understand is that where cities often provide similar services, each city largely stands on its own financially and operationally. If a road in Weed needs repair, Mount Shasta isn't going to pay for it. If our sewer system needs upgrades, Wairika isn't going to fund it. If our fire station needs replaced, Dunsmuir isn't going to build it. Every city is responsible for maintaining its own infrastructure, balancing its own budget, and providing services to its own residents. The City of Weed provides police, fire, emergency, streets, water, wastewater, planning and permitting, library services, and administrative operations. We also maintain 25 miles of roadway, along with water and sewer systems of similar scale. Those services don't happen automatically. They require employees, equipment, facilities, infrastructure, and ongoing investment. So one example of how service demands are changing can be seen in our fire department. In 2023, as you can see on the slide here, the department responded to 402 calls. In 2025, that number has increased to 812 calls. That is nearly double in just 2 years. Many of these calls are medical emergencies, but the important takeaway is not just the number. The important takeaway that I want people to see is that the demand for service continues to increase, well, regardless of where our funding's at. Usually it stays the same. And let's make no mistake, over the last several years, our community has faced challenges affecting both residents and the city and how we operate. Many of us have experienced those impacts firsthand. Recent fires have resulted in the loss of homes, changes to neighborhoods, and significant impacts to families throughout our community. These events have also affected the city's financial picture. When homes are lost, housing stock is reduced. When property is damaged or removed from productive use, it can affect the local tax base. At the same time, recovery efforts often increase demand for city services, more inspections, more public safety activity, more planning and coordination, more infrastructure considerations. In other words, significant community events can create a situation in which demands on local government increase while resources remain constrained. Wildfire risk also remains an ongoing reality for communities throughout Siskiyou County. It's something we must continue to plan for, prepare for, and incorporate into our long-term decision-making. I think the important takeaway from the slide is not that these challenges are unique to Weed, but that communities must adapt. Our responsibility is to respond thoughtfully, continue serving you, and make decisions that strengthen the community's resilience over the long term. And that's really one of the reasons we're having this conversation tonight. The choices we make today about infrastructure, public safety, facilities, and financial planning, all of these will determine how prepared and resilient Weed will be tomorrow. So many of the systems serving Weed today were built decades ago. Some portions of the sewer system date back to the 1940s. The wastewater system is operating near capacity, especially in the South Weed area. There are gaps in portions of our storm drainage system. Approximately 15 miles of roadway need repair. The reality is infrastructure ages whether we talk about it or not. The question isn't whether repairs will eventually be needed. The question is whether we address those needs proactively or reactively. Infrastructure isn't limited to roads, water lines, and sewer pipes either. The city also maintains public facilities that support day-to-day operations and emergency services. For example, the recent project we did on City Hall. We had to remediate water damage that goes back decades. As with City Hall and many of our other facilities, our facilities are aging. The most visible example outside of City Hall is our city's fire station. The fire station is more than 100 years old, and more importantly, it's not owned by the city of Weed. As many of you know, city staff and council have been evaluating long-term options for the development of a future fire station on city-owned property. As I stated in my update to the city earlier today, we are making strides to make that happen. And again, I want to give a shout out to Roseburg and Kirk Andrews, our district attorney, for agreeing to pay for phase 1 of that project. But still, it's evident of the many needs that we have to confront. So I guess the point is, this isn't simply a conversation about just 2 buildings. It's a conversation about ensuring that emergency services have a stable, functional, and reliable home for decades to come. Just as roads and utilities do, facilities require maintenance, investment, and long-term planning. Infrastructure is only one part of the equation. Same with facilities maintenance. The other part, and arguably the more important part, is our people. You can have the best equipment and facilities in the world, but services still depend on qualified personnel showing up every day to provide them. Like many communities throughout California, Weed is facing staffing challenges. Current staffing levels do not support 24-hour operations for police coverage every day of the year. The police department has been authorized 9 officers for the last couple of years, and one position continues to remain vacant to this day. At the same time, just like the fire department, the police department also has increased calls for service. And since we're going back to the fire department, a volunteer participation, and it's not just for fire, it's for all civic organizations, is on the decline. Recruitment and retention remain difficult because larger agencies often offer higher salaries, sign-on bonuses, and incentives that smaller rural communities like us cannot match. The important takeaway is that maintaining service levels isn't just about buildings or infrastructure. It's also about maintaining the workforce necessary to provide those services. The people serving this community is arguably one of your most important assets. And workforce challenges are becoming increasingly common across rural California. It's not just us. Moving on to budgets, one of the biggest misconceptions about local government is that the city has one large bank account that we can use for anything. That's not how municipal finance works. The city operates multiple funds, or what I like to call buckets, each with rules governing how those buckets can be spent. Think about it like a household budget, right? You can have money set aside for your mortgage payment, retirement savings, college savings, or everyday expenses. Just because money exists in one account doesn't mean it can legally or responsibly be used for another purpose. City finances work much in the same way. Water revenue generally must be used for water operations and infrastructure. Wastewater revenue generally must be used for wastewater operations and infrastructure. Gas, same thing. Grant funds are often restricted to very specific uses. The general fund, however, is different. The general fund supports many of the services residents think about most often, including our police, our fire, our streets, our administration, and other day-to-day operations. One question we frequently hear is, well, if the city receives grants, why don't grants solve these problems? The answer is that grants are incredibly valuable, and we pursue them aggressively whenever possible. I think the latest number is the city staff has been able to leverage city funds to get over $50 million of grants. That is incredible. But grants generally help build things. They don't usually pay for decades of maintenance, staffing, utilities, insurance, repairs, or replacement of things. A simple example would be if I were to give you a new pickup truck. It's wonderful, you got a new truck. But I'm not going to pay you for the fuel. I'm not going to pay for your tires, your oil changes, your insurance. And I'm not going to pay to replace that new truck in 15 years from now or whenever it decides to go kaput. Those ongoing costs become the individual's responsibility who gets the free truck. And infrastructure works the same way. Grants will help us build things, but local revenues help us operate and maintain them. So understanding where city revenue comes from is one of the most important parts of understanding local government. Many people assume that all cities are funded the same way. Every city's financial picture in reality is different because every local economy is different. A city like San Francisco has major tourism, international commerce, large corporations, millions of visitors, a port, and revenue sources that do not exist in a rural community. Some communities rely heavily on hotel taxes. Some rely on major industrial employers. Some benefit from large commercial shopping districts. Others rely on agriculture or manufacturing. While some cities often produce many of the same services, that's true. The way those services are funded can look dramatically different from one city or community to another. The City of Weed's economy has been historically shaped by lumber, transportation, commerce, industry, and travelers moving through the Interstate 5 corridor. Our funding comes from sales tax, property tax, utility revenues, grants, transient occupancy taxes, gas taxes, fees, and other revenue sources. However, much of that funding is restricted. And while we are grateful for grants and outside funding opportunities, no one else is ultimately responsible for Weed's infrastructure except Weed. Outside funding could help us build something. Outside funding could help us repair something, but no one is going to come solve Weed's challenges for us permanently. Long-term solutions ultimately must be built here, funded here, and sustained here. That is why local revenues matter. So now that we've discussed where city revenues come from, let's talk about where they go. The general fund is the city's primary flexible funding source. That is the fund that supports many of the services that you rely on every day. Approximately 35% of the general fund supports police. 15% support fire. 15% supports public works. The remaining portion supports administration and other city functions. This illustrates that most general fund dollars are already dedicated to providing the core services you rely on every day. Police officers, firefighters, public works employees, street maintenance, administrative support. The general fund isn't sitting idle. It's actively supporting the services that keep the service a city operating every day. So this brings us to an important concept, funding flexibility. Not all dollars are created equal. Some dollars can be used for specific purposes. Grant funding often comes with restrictions, like we talked about earlier. Utility revenues come with restrictions. Gas tax revenues come with restrictions. The general fund is one of the few places where city council and city staff have the flexibility to respond to changing needs. When a water line breaks, the water fund has to repair it. If a facility needs repairs, equipment fails, or unexpected costs arise, a flexible funding source such as the general fund is a critical component to how we fund the city. The challenge for us right now is that demand for flexible spending continues to grow. Another challenge is that factors outside local control influence some of our most important revenue sources. Approximately 70 to 80% of our sales tax is estimated to come from fuel and service stations. The city benefits significantly from travelers on Interstate 5 and pass-through traffic. More than 1/3 of sales tax revenue comes through state and county allocation formulas. So in other words, some of the revenues supporting city services depend on decisions and economic conditions that occur far beyond the city's limits. That creates uncertainty when we're trying to plan. For many years, the city has had to make difficult choices. When resources are limited, local governments are often faced with the decision: do we reduce services today, or do we postpone repairs and maintenance until tomorrow? Historically, the city has often chosen to preserve services. That means that some maintenance projects have been delayed. Some infrastructure projects have been postponed. Some facility improvements have been delayed. Those decisions help maintain services for residents, but deferred maintenance does not disappear. It accumulates. It's important to recognize that city staff and city leadership have worked hard to manage resources responsibly. Unfortunately, despite everything we have been doing to confront our fiscal reality and reduce spending, personnel costs remain one of the largest expenses we have. This includes state requirements for police, rising costs of everything, and a reduced tax base, resulting in approximately $1.6 million deficit in our budget. Vacancies have remained unfilled. Departments continue operating with lean staff levels. One-time funding sources have been used to bridge short-term gaps. The city has consistently focused on maintaining essential services while living within available resources. This isn't the story about reckless spending. It's a story about managing competing priorities with limited resources. So despite those efforts, the underlying pressures do not go away. Infrastructure continues to age. Construction costs continue to rise. Equipment costs continue to rise. Insurance costs continue to rise. And labor costs continue to rise. At the same time, residents continue to expect reliable service, safe roads, dependable utilities, and effective public safety services. And to be fair, those expectations are more than reasonable. The challenge for us is ensuring that revenues keep pace with the cost of providing those services. And that's where we start to have challenges. So I wanted to provide this slide as a snapshot of the city's general fund budget for fiscal year 26 and 27. The city is projecting approximately $6.18 million in general fund revenue, compared with approximately $7.7 million in planned expenditures. That creates a budgeted difference of about $1.52 million. And that's our continued projected shortfall over the next couple of years. Now, keep in mind, we do estimate low on the revenue side because I'd much rather answer to you in council than telling you that we have too much money as opposed to too little. But still, it's a fiscal reality that what's coming in and what we're projected coming in. And usually when you do projections, we compare at least 3 to 5 years of previous data when making those projections. So we try to be as accurate as possible when we estimate. What's coming in is not covering what's going out. So this figure illustrates the broader challenge facing the city. We are trying to find ways to make up the difference. The city can use reserves and one-time resources to manage short-term differences. We've been doing that the last couple of years, but that's not a good way to manage the city budget. Those reserves should remain reserves while we maintain what comes in should match what goes out. So the next slide, I wanted to just to understand the budget clearly, we also need to distinguish between recurring operating costs and one-time project expenses, which goes back to what I said earlier. The incoming revenues need to match the ongoing costs. And I like this breakdown because it does a pretty good job of explaining what I have to pay for every year versus the one-time projects that we have to cover. It's a useful tool in explaining the difference. I guess the short answer is one-time funding can help us build or improve something, but dependable recurring revenue is needed to operate and maintain those investments over the long term. So that is why we as a city must evaluate not only the total budget difference, but also whether ongoing revenues are sufficient to support ongoing services. So looking ahead, this brings us to the future. The purpose of this presentation is not to dwell on our problems. My purpose is to have an honest conversation about opportunities and priorities. The city continues to pursue grants and other funding sources whenever possible. The city continues to look for inefficiencies and efficiencies in our daily operations. We continue to evaluate infrastructure priorities and long-term needs. But ultimately, we must decide what kind of community we want to be in 10 or 20 years. What level of services do we want? What infrastructure do you want me to maintain? What facilities do you want us to preserve? And how do you want us to pay for these things? Those are the conversations that I am asking for tonight. But ultimately, the future of weed will be determined by decisions made by citizens of weed. The current sales tax is 7.5%. However, one of the biggest misconceptions is that when you get billed 7.5% in your receipt, that the city of Weed gets all that money. That's not the case. Today, approximately 6% of your sales tax goes to the state of California. I do not see a cent of that. About 1.25%, or about 1/4 goes to Siskiyou County. The city of Weed sees a total of 1.25% of that total sales tax. In other words, when someone makes a taxable purchase in the city of Weed, the city receives only a small fraction of the total sales tax shown in your receipt. The majority goes elsewhere through the California's sales tax system. That 1.25-cent local share helps support police services, fire, streets, administration, and other day-to-day activities. Understanding that distinction is important because when we talk about local revenues, we're talking about the portion that stays in Weed and supports Weed's priorities. It's often helpful to look at what neighboring communities are doing. Today, Weed's sales tax rate is 7.5%. Based on the current numbers, that places us in the middle of the range. However, a lot of these cities are going through similar sales tax measures, including Mount Shasta. I've heard 1.5%, but I've even heard rumors of 2. I don't know. That's just rumor. It's not just Siskiyou County and cities in Siskiyou County that are going through that either. There are many communities throughout California who have adopted local sales tax measures over the last several decades to try to keep pace with the cost of providing services to our citizens. The reason isn't that cities suddenly want more money. The reason is the cost of providing services and maintaining infrastructure has increased dramatically over time. Roads cost more to repair. Equipment costs more to replace. Construction costs more. Insurance costs more. Public requirements cost more, as we learned through the RFP process. The challenges we're discussing tonight are not unique to the city of Weed. Communities throughout California are having many of the same conversations. This comparison shows that Weed is not an outlier. We're facing many of the same pressures as neighboring communities, and many of those communities have adopted local measures already. It's also important to remember that every city is different. A city like San Francisco, who I heard has a 12% sales tax rate, they have a completely different economic engine than Weed does. A city like Mount Shasta has different revenue drivers than we do. A city like Doris has different challenges from us. So while cities often provide similar services, the way those services are funded can look very different from one economy to another. So the purpose of this comparison is not to suggest that Weed should do it because other people are doing it or because it's been done before. The purpose is to provide context, to show where Weed currently stands, and to help residents and voters understand how our community compares with others facing similar challenges. So one option currently on the table with City Council is a potential 1.5% local sales tax measure. The discussion is not about expanding government for the sake of expanding it. The discussion is about maintaining the services and infrastructure residents already rely upon while addressing deferred maintenance and long-term infrastructure needs that have accumulated over many years. This includes roads, facilities, public safety, water and wastewater infrastructure, and it also includes preserving our ability to continue providing the services that you expect. The proposal would bring weed sales tax more in line with those in many neighboring communities. Any measure would require voter approval. The decision is entirely in your hands. So I really like this graphic because it does a good job of illustrating how the change would affect long term. Again, reminding residents that the city doesn't see 6% of your sales tax right off the bat. So the city's overall sales tax rate would increase from 7.5% to 9%. That would place weed within, again, the range with many communities throughout California that have adopted similar local measures to support their services and infrastructure. It's important to also remember that this slide is not a proposal being implemented tonight. It simply illustrates what the rate would be if voters approved a local measure. Ultimately, this decision belongs to the voters of Weed. The city's role is to provide information so residents can make informed decisions. It's also important to remember what we've discussed throughout this presentation. The conversation isn't simply about a tax rate. It's about maintaining roads. It's about maintaining public safety services. It's about maintaining infrastructure. And it's about maintaining the quality of life that you have come to expect from us as your local government. And again, remember, 6% goes to California, 0.2%, 0.25% goes to Siskiyou County. And under this proposal, we would be asking for 2.75%. And that would stay local in control of your city council. I also want to remind voters, because people often ask, what actually gets taxed? And that's a valid question. The answer is that many everyday necessities are already exempt from sales tax. For example, most groceries are exempt. Prescription medications are exempt. Most professional services are exempt. And items purchased using CalFresh benefits are also exempt. In other words, many of the essentials that you rely upon every day are not subject to sales tax anyway. Understanding these exemptions will help provide a clearer picture of how sales tax works and where it applies. And I want to remind you of the information that I said earlier. Remember that 70 to 80% of this would be funded by I-5 traffic and people shopping at our convenience stores. Again, as with every part of this discussion tonight, my goal is not to convince you one way or the other. The goal is to provide information and context so that you can make an informed decision about the future of weed. So based on current estimates, a 1.5% local sales tax measure could generate approximately between $1.5 to $2 million annually for the general fund. Those dollars would stay here. They would remain under local control via your city council and staff. And they could be used to maintain the services that we already have, address the infrastructure needs that we have, and preserve the quality of life that you've come to expect.